All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Speak. We're super excited to have Dr. Grace Franko with us from TCU. She's also one of our board members at DSP&T. Today, she's going to be talking about skills and strategies to promote success for transition to young adulthood with OT. A few people might jump on later. I just ask that you please mute yourself while she's giving her presentation, and there will be time for questions at the end. Thank you so much for being here, and let me make Dr. Franko a co-host.
Thank you, Whitney.
All right, you should be the host now.
Okay, I will get things sorted with sharing and make sure that everything is good to go. Um, so I should be able to do, oopsie. Can you see that okay?
Hi.
Oh, and then I can no longer see.
I'm in a Zoom call. I live here as well. I'm his wife. So if you need anything, just knock on the door. Thanks. All right, thanks.
I can no longer see the participants' view or the video, so I apologize if I don't see anyone raising their hand. You could put something in the chat or just interrupt me with your audio. But I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you all about skills and support strategies to promote success for transition to young adulthood. I wanted to introduce myself. So I am Grace Franco Barlow, and I am an occupational therapist. And I would say that I have expertise in both early intervention and post-secondary transition for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I uh, got into the field of occupational therapy after participating in an adaptive physical education program at my high school in Chicago. I knew that I wanted to pursue a career that supported individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, like my friends that I had with me in my PE class. From there, I went to undergrad at Texas Christian University here in Fort Worth, and I participated in occupational therapy observation hours at Kinderfrogs, which is an early intervention program on campus for young children with Down syndrome. And then I went to grad school for occupational therapy in St. Louis at Washington University in St. Louis, where most of my research and participation outside of the classroom was in developing an independent living skills curriculum with a local community agency to support young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And from there, I practiced in clinical practice with a private occupational therapy practice where I worked with early intervention. And I also supported development of both group and individual services, occupational therapy services for young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And specifically, I started a collaboration with the Down Syndrome Association in St. Louis to develop group programming for individuals transitioning to adulthood. Now I'm back at Texas Christian University where we're starting a Doctor of Occupational Therapy program. It starts in June, and I'm super excited to be back in Fort Worth. So I know that this presentation was catered towards transition, but I know that the transition process starts at different ages, and we can work towards skills for transition from an early age. So whether you're in the audience with as a caregiver or a loved one of a young adult, or a teenager with Down syndrome, or a young child with Down syndrome, this presentation is still relevant to all of you. So I would love for you to just think about, does your child or your loved one currently receive occupational therapy services? If not, have they previously? What goals did they work on with their occupational therapist? And when did they stop occupational therapy services, if they did? I kind of want to share today that you don't need to stop being supported by an occupational therapist, whether that's in a school system or outside of it. And it's one really wonderful way to support transition to young adulthood is through occupational therapy services. So the transition to young adulthood, what is transition? So sometimes you hear about it as the transition to young adulthood. Some refer to it as post-secondary transition. But really it's that time when we think about like high school and beyond. It's a lifelong journey though. So it's something we can start focusing on from a young age. It doesn't have to be just 18 and up or 16 and up, 21 and up. You can start focusing on the goals for transition early on. But what we know about the transition to young adulthood for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and specifically with Down syndrome, is that there's often a service gap or services drop at this time in an individual's life. And oftentimes, families and caregivers often ask what comes next after high school or after transition programming up to the age of 21 or 22 within special education. And usually we like to think of three buckets: post-secondary education, employment, independent living. So, but any variation of this, not just living on your own, but increased independence at this stage of life. There are disparities that exist for adults with disabilities compared to adults without disabilities in all of these realms. And so thinking about transition early on and throughout an individual's life is important. So I want to touch on the federal legislation on youth transition, which is within IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So this act is what supports free, appropriate public education for students with disabilities from ages 3 to 21. And OT, occupational therapy, is a related service that the team can determine is necessary for a student to meet their goals. The purpose of special education is to prepare students for further education, independent living, and employment. That is a goal. So we want to support all of those things as we are thinking about transition. And specifically through IDEA, transition to adult life services must address the student's daily living, post-secondary education, and employment goals. So formal transition planning is required by the age of 16 federally, but Texas as a state says 14 or earlier if ARD thinks it's necessary. So transition plans must consider youth strengths, preferences, and interests. And that's kind of the background for transition within the school systems. But there are many predictors of post-school success. So this is from a research article that came out very recently, and it's on secondary transition predictors for post-school success. So these are some of the things that are essential to consider for your loved one as an indicator for success after high school. So participation in career and technical education, otherwise known as vocational education. So to promote participation in that. If it's a sheltered opportunity, it may not offer as positive of outcomes. So with that, I mean, you want it to be integrated, not segregated opportunities. So education, vocational education, or career and technical education that's integrated. Another predictor of post-school success is paid work before graduating high school. Also participation in work study. So that's not just the doing of participating in work or vocational education, but studying the skills that are essential for work, like attitudes and behaviors in a work setting. Additionally, goal setting with transition-specific goals is a predictor of post-school success. And we're setting those goals through IDEA in an IEP. That's mandatory. But I'll talk about a little bit later how you can also think of goals outside of the school setting, transition-specific goals, because if you want to start transition planning earlier, sometimes IEPs aren't able to address the same transition specific goals or non-education focused goals earlier on in an IEP because you're not in that period of transition yet. But we can still be working towards those goals. I see there's some chat talk, so I just wanted to look at this. Oh, thank you so much for sharing ages. So I'll move that out of the way. But yeah, this is super helpful for me to know who's in the audience. Thank you all so much. Um, Continuing on is for predictors of post-school success. So inclusion in general education is an indicator, and that is not just in high schools or grade schools. This means college too, if you're thinking about post-secondary education. And specifically, inclusion in general education in 80% of the school day, and enrollment in regular is the word they used in this study, but regular high schools rather than segregated high schools. So thinking about that as you advocate for your loved one. Parent expectations of success are a predictor of post-school success. So we want to keep expectations high for the individuals we're caring for. And then student employment support. So that kind of goes back towards that vocational education, work study, paid work, but career counseling, obtaining help finding a job, training for job skills, etc. Those are another predictor. And lastly, participation in a transition program. So you'll have the opportunity through special education typically to participate in a transition program and continue goals with special education to the age of 21 or 22. And these goals in transition programming are often focused more on goals of independence for transition rather than your standard education-based goals earlier on in your education journey. And beyond predictors for post-school success, this same study talked about essential skills for success. And so these are skills that can be supported with through a variety of supports, but independent living skills, and those can mean self-care skills, home management skills, financial management, community mobility, social skills or soft skills, self-determination and self-advocacy, which I'll touch on more, but sometimes when we think of that, we're thinking about psychological empowerment, the belief in the relationship between your actions and outcomes, self-realization or understanding strengths and support needs as an individual with a disability, and then decision making, being able to participate in the decision making process. And lastly, technology skills. But to touch on decision making, this can be a really key factor and essential skill specifically as it pertains to the transition planning process in education or outside of it. We want to incorporate an individual in the transition planning process and help them understand their own preferences, interests, and abilities and act on those within their goals and their plans. So there are lots of supports for young adulthood that do exist. Sometimes they are harder to find. I won't pretend that the gap isn't there, but there are opportunities out there. So you have your transition programming that might be a continuation of your special education curriculum in your district. But there's also post-secondary education opportunities, whether that's straight out of senior year of high school after a transition programming or later down the road. There's also community-based programming, like you have within the Down Syndrome Partnership and within other organizations that support individuals with Down syndrome and other disabilities. And there are therapy services like occupational therapy, but you might think about speech therapy as well as it pertains to social skills, not just speech as far as your language goes, but other expressive and receptive opportunities for engagement socially. And then there's job coaching, and that's not where the list, that's not an exhaustive list, but just an example of supports for young adulthood. And I just want to kind of touch on OT specifically as a support for individuals with Down syndrome for young adulthood. So occupational therapy is not just for handwriting. And we do see that occupational therapy services drop off within the education system earlier on for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and for individuals with Down syndrome. And so occupational therapy services, really the gist of OT is to promote participation and performance in all meaningful activities of daily life. And so advocating for that within your IEP plan or looking externally for private practice options or outpatient therapy options, using your insurance to support different goals is an option or later on in life, not just early on in childhood. Um, so, as occupational therapists, we can provide evaluations for independent living skills. This also incorporates job skills and informs success for a post-secondary education program. And from that, we can create an intervention plan to identify goals and work towards those goals. And we can consider the amount of sessions allotted from insurance and kind of prioritize goals, and work towards achieving those for success in transition. Um, we can do group services sometimes, depending on the practice your support that is offering services, but those do exist. Sometimes pediatric therapy groups that are the groups that would support even the young adults in transition, and sometimes they're willing to provide group services if you come to them with a group of peers who you feel like would benefit from group services. So thinking outside of the box is an option. Individual services are usually paying out of pocket or um, through your insurance, and there are plenty of opportunities with insurance as well. And then a lot of therapists will provide consult services. Again, this might look like an out-of-pocket option, but if you're feeling like you as a parent or a caregiver or a loved one to someone with Down syndrome need some support in supporting your loved one to achieve their goals, you can consult with an OT to talk about kind of supports and strategies that you can be implementing. Typically, an OT might want an evaluation of the individual first, just so they have a baseline to then offer opportunities for consult. And really, depending on your goals and needs, a mixture of these services can be a great plan. And as far as supports and strategies go, these might be implemented through consult services or practice in individual therapy sessions, but you can find us supporting individuals with Down syndrome through visual supports, modification of tasks, modification of environment, tech supports like calendars, reminders on your phone, applications to support independent living skills. So there's lots of ways that we can support individuals in the transition process. I'm wanting to go into the skills and aims that we're thinking about at the transition age, which is around that 16 to 21 age. But I think those lines can get blurred and should be, because again, transition occurs through adulthood and earlier in childhood as well. But when we're thinking about it from the IDEA and the federal side of things, you're looking at 16 to 21, and in Texas at 14 to 21, 22, depending on your age and the calendar. But we want, when you're in the transition stage, you want to be looking at the goals. You want to have an assessment of where you're at. Think about refining your skills and applying your skills in different settings, in the school setting and outside of it. So looking at your IEP goals, but then considering personal goals outside of the IEP as well, and getting maybe a second opinion from an occupational therapist. Or there's some informal assessments that I'm going to share towards the end that could be a good way to kind of reflect on what's going well, where do you want to be as an adult, and how can we get there. So one thing I wanted to touch on within this age range is kind of what is self-determination, because I think it's a term that we hear often around transition, and it's a skill that is kind of ambiguous, but very important when it comes to becoming an adult. And so, self-determination are the intentional actions that allow an individual to act as the primary person causing things in his or her life. Those are intentional actions to improve quality of life as well. And key elements are acting with autonomy, behaving with self-regulation, responding with empowerment, and self-determination as a skill and a concept is something occupational therapists are especially familiar with. And also, there are assessments that are within our realm that we could look at specifically to see where can we improve skills of self-determination. Um, and so that's kind of what we're thinking about when we're thinking about this 16 to 21 age. And I want to kind of go back in reverse through childhood and beyond and talk about some of the skills that develop from the time of being a toddler up until the 16 to 21. And we know that certain skills that you are starting with at a really young age are still certain skills that you're refining as you go along. And so while I know our audience here today has loved ones who are closer to that 16, 21 and up age, I still want to touch on some of the skills for earlier on, since this is a recorded session that could benefit other viewers in the future. So, skill aims for even the ages of 3 to 5. We're thinking you can think about transition early on. And so, some of the skills that you're aiming for are those foundational skills that are going to set your loved one up for success when they're an adult. So, thinking about language, whether that's expanding receptive and expressive language, expanding gross motor and fine motor skills like opening food packages and self-feeding. Those are skills that you're going to need when you're an adult. Self-management skills such as hygiene, so foundational skills of washing your hands, participating in independent toileting, dressing yourself. Safety skills like recognizing danger of hot, sharp, or an emergency situation. Self-awareness, thinking about those toy preferences, choice making, personal information like your name, your age, your gender. With self-awareness is a key foundational skill for self-determination and that decision making and choice making. So we want to promote that early on. Self-control. A lot of the skills for 3 to 5 that are developmentally appropriate, and what we're striving for is briefly stopping when told no, or following routines at home or in a social setting or daycare or school, accepting transitions from one thing to the other, or social skills like playing alongside peers and participating in small and large groups. So hopefully you can see how these foundational skills of development are the building blocks for success in transition. Aims from 6 to 11. And these skills specifically that I'm sharing are coming from a resource that I have from what is called the special school district in St. Louis County, where I'm coming from. But I found it to be a resource that really outlined skill development by age. And each of these skills are things that occupational therapists can support you with. So skills from 6 to 11, the aims are for financial management, kind of building on counting money, making purchases, identifying a need versus a want, saving money. Household management, like helping with chores, eating with utensils, basic cooking, washing clothes. Personal needs, like fitness knowledge or participation, grooming and hygiene. Nutrition knowledge, knowledge of a common illness with prevention and treatment. Leisure, just participating in activities, choosing activities, knowing there's community resources or options like the pool, the park, or community programs. Community participation, like traffic rules, safety with the streets, technology, like participating in leisure on the computer or using technology to communicate, whether that's in school or outside of it, calling a family member or friend on the phone, knowing a password, safety rules within that, starting that early on, especially in today's day and age. Career awareness, identifying who's a community helper or what kind of worker that is, identifying likes that at home or likes at school, things that you're interested in, understanding why people work or skills that you need to do the job. Work habits and behaviors of following directions, working with others, doing your best as a concept, trying again as a concept, timeliness, attendance. Social skills like responsibility, following rules, recognizing authority, respecting others. Interpersonal skills like listening and responding, establishing and maintaining relationships, conflict management, or communication with understanding right now at this age, just being able to express yourself. Self-awareness about your physical and psychological needs, as well as physical and psychological aspects like body parts or emotions. Self-confidence, accepting and giving praise, self-worth, self-determination, like we talked about, now setting goals, participation in your IEP, asking for help, expressing preferences. And then our last age group is at 12 to 15. And so as you can see, these skills, these like buckets of skills remain the same, but we're just kind of building on them. So you have financial management. Now maybe you're talking about banking services, the difference between a checking or savings account, a debit card. Household management might be identifying different places to live or people to live with, renting versus owning, just understanding those concepts. Personal needs like purchasing and preparing foods, leisure, planning your own leisure time, not just thinking about what you want to do, but maybe you're the one initiating the plans. Um, Community participation, finding ways around the community. Technology continues, career awareness might expand, like identifying financial aspects of why people work or personal values that you have that would be met through a specific job. Job categories like food services, health industry, etc. Work habits and behaviors expand, social responsibility, interpersonal skills, communication expands. Well, at this stage, I feel like expanding understanding of the subtleties of communication, like sarcasm, body language, etc. Self-awareness of like body boundaries, space boundaries, conversation boundaries. Self-confidence continues, and self-determination of accepting assistance when needed, developing goal-seeking behavior, participating in that long-range planning of like, what is this going to look like when I'm 25, 35, 45? Just thinking about the future ahead and being a part of that plan. So I really just wanted to highlight those skills because everything I just touched on, every example is a goal that OT could support. And so whether that's in the school system in before transition planning and transition specific goals, in the transition period, or outside of the school system with private occupational therapy, these are all things that we could support. And so post-secondary education, I just wanted to touch on this a little bit because I know we talked about kind of the three buckets of transition being independent living, post-secondary education, and employment. And young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities have fewer post-secondary options. Almost 70% of youth with disabilities in the US, without disabilities in the US, attend college, while only 28% of young adults with IDD enroll in college. And it's a post-secondary education is a great option for increased skill development, social opportunities, and inclusion. However, this gap does exist, and I think it's just important to think about the options and what might be out there for your loved one. And again, occupational therapy can have a contribution to this. They can support access to this if this is a goal, and maybe even support someone as they're participating in a program to promote success throughout the way. So, specifically, but beyond all of those skills that I outlined, thinking about person-centeredness, life skills, assisted tech, training for modification and application of what's called universal design of learning principles. So how can you best support an individual with Down syndrome learning in this environment of post-secondary education? And then I wanted to just go through a few resources. So you may or may not be familiar with a few of these resources. And I'm continuing to learn about the resources that are available locally in DFW as I've just returned in the past half a year. And so I'm excited to learn more. But on a global level, I wanted to introduce Charting the Life course if you haven't heard of it already. But it's a framework with a set of both person-centered and family perspective tools to organize ideas, visions, and goals, as well as problem solve, navigate, and advocate for support. And that's the sort of informal assessment that I referred to earlier. If you want to think about these outside of school setting in your own home, it's a free resource. And I'm going to pull it up here in a minute. It's a free resource for anyone to access. And you can use them to communicate needs, set goals, understand life experiences and impact on goals, explore services, supports, advocate, understand family members' ideas for the future, and understand the individual with disabilities' idea for the future, and collaborate for the planning. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a moment, and I'm going to show you this Charting the Life course. Oopsie. That should be good. Okay, yes. So just want to make sure that everyone can still see. It says I'm sharing the screen, but can someone confirm in the chat that they can see this Charting the Life course? Thank you, Winnie. Okay, so Charting the Life course, like I said, is full of resources. And so the tools that I use most are these foundational tools. So when you go to the Life Course Tools website, you have the Life Course library. It tells you all about the framework, but I prefer to use these tools as a great resource for planning. So they have the family perspective. They also have this person-centered perspective of different resources. And you can scroll down and there's multiple different resources here that you can download for free. You have a trajectory for exploring, and the term that Life Course uses is called good life. And so the individual's idea of a good life and what that would look like, and that's a big part of adulthood is what is your goal for a good life? What does that look like for you? And so there's a trajectory for exploring what that might look like. It's a first step. A trajectory for planning what that might look like. You have your support star, which could be supports to do so, to access your good life. You have your life vision, reciprocal roles, mapping relationships, goal attainment, planning and tracking for specific goals, setting them and trying to attain them. And then this integrated support schedule. It's kind of like a calendar to identify supports and when you would use them in your daily life. But the ones I use most are this life trajectory planning. Just checking the chat. Oh, thank you, Lisa, for letting me know as well. Life trajectory planning. And this is something I used a lot with young adults in my independent living skills program that I supported. But thinking about past experiences, moving forward, and this would be a conversation. It could be used with a caregiver, it could be used with a therapist. You could bring it in multiple different settings if you feel like there's someone who would be a trusted person, like a sibling who would have a really good conversation, or a friend who would have a really good conversation with your loved one. This tool is it just sparks the topics that you need to kind of consider. So past experiences that have supported your vision for a good life, past experiences that have pushed your trajectory towards things you don't want. Moving forward, life experiences or goals that would continue to support and things you want to avoid. And then listing things like what you want for your good life to look like and what you don't want. I think that's a really good starting point, and can broaden your ideas for independent living and transition outside of educational goals, or it can be focused to education. So that's the cool thing with these is you can personalize it to say, okay, let's talk about the past experiences of education and moving forward in your education. Or let's talk about the past experiences of living with this family or living with your sibling or living with a friend. Moving forward, what do you want? Or you can do the larger scope of life in general. So personalizable and just a great framework. This second piece that I love to use is this integrated support star. And so it gives you examples, prompts to help you fill it out. But your support star consists of personal strengths, relationships, eligibility specific supports, community-based supports, and technology supports. And then some examples like skills, strengths, assets, technology that you use, like your phone or your computer, or assistive and adaptive technology that you might use for day-to-day tasks, environmental technology, the community-based supports like groups or organizations like the Down Syndrome Partnership, a church, workplace, school, eligibility specific like special education or Medicaid, um, different things, need-based services based on your employment, your geography, and then relationships. All of these things are supports. And so helping an individual understand what supports they already have and maybe being able to think about I don't have many in my technology support, and that would be a really helpful support to have um, as you're planning for transition. Or I'd love to kind of bolster up my relationships or get more involved in the community. And so using this as a starting point can also be a great place for planning. And then the next resource that I had listed on my sides was Think College. And Think College is another resource more specific to post-secondary education. And so if your loved one or your family is thinking about what options are there for post-secondary education, it doesn't need to be right away after high school. It can be something you work towards, but just a great resource to think about. College Search allows you to look at states. Obviously, we're in Texas, and there are quite a few programs now. Not all of them are. Some of them are more specific for adults with Down syndrome. Some of them are specific to adults with intellectual disabilities. Some are developmental disabilities. So just being able to explore the options that are within the state, or even some outside of the state, which is can be a scary thought, but there are so many programs with such different strengths throughout the United States. And one thing I did see was that when I search here for on the site for Down syndrome, you can find that last year, the Down Syndrome College Fair was at the annual convention, and that might be something you already knew about. But being able to talk to Think College or other colleges or other organizations to say, like, are there programs that people with Down syndrome have had great success with? Is this program, what does this program look like compared to this program? And using those resources to kind of sift through opportunities. Um, but additionally, the resources on here, whether it's specific to post-secondary education and really thinking about that plan, but or employment opportunities, there's films that might be a helpful resource for understanding opportunities more. And Think College is through the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston. And when I searched the Institute for Inclusion at UMass Boston, they also have publications that look like really just useful and accessible kind of fact sheets. And I loved that there was one that said, um, conducting a college search, questions to ask college programs. So there's resources out there. Um, but again, an occupational therapist could help advise you on thinking about, okay, this program says it needs these skills. Let's go to the OT and get an evaluation of where our skills are. What strategies and supports and skill development could we do to get you closer to those essential skills to be a great student or participant in this post-secondary education program? Same goes for deciding to move into an apartment with a friend or a group living situation, like getting out of the home that an individual has been in their whole life, or seeking a job. So all different resources that I thought I'd share. And lastly is the resources page on the Down Syndrome Partnership of North Texas website, which I'm sure many of you have already accessed. But when you're thinking, oopsie, sorry about that. I don't often get a landline call. But when you're thinking about all of the resources that are available through this new lens of thinking about transition, whether you're in that 14 and up or 16 and up stage or earlier on, how can we have our transition to adulthood piece here, and it's scrolling on its own. And there's three specific resources, but then if you scroll up and look at therapy, maybe that's something that is also supporting transition. Leisure is supporting transition. Job employment is supporting transition. Community mobility is supporting transition. So even using these travel options and getting good at a North Texas rideshare or different resources here. I just pulled that one out of here. But so I just wanted to point you in this direction so that you could look at it through a new lens, even though they might be resources that you've been familiar with for a while. And so with that, I just wanted to open it up to Yes, and the Down Syndrome Congress is in Dallas this summer. I should have emphasized that as well. So it might be a good opportunity to look at the schedule and see if there's any transition specific opportunities, presentations, fair, the college fair might be coming again here in Dallas. So that could be a huge resource for all different topics of transition. And this was just meant to be an overview to help you understand the supports that occupational therapy can provide. And I'm sure it sounds like I'm saying we can do it all, but it's just a passion of mine to bring OT back into the lives of young adults with Down syndrome, teenagers with Down syndrome, and not just stopping with handwriting or dressing, zipping up your coat. We can do a lot more to promote participation and performance. So I'm going to stop sharing and just ask you all if you have any questions. And I'm so grateful that I could be here today. Thank you, Lisa. Yep. Continued OT is definitely helpful. And I'm excited to be a part of the Down Syndrome Partnership and continue to collaborate with the organization to think about how we can collaborate between TCU's new occupational therapy program and the Down Syndrome Partnership to just expand on resources throughout the lifespan. Yeah, so Lisa said she's seeing improvement in many areas, even though we stopped for several years, and her therapist is really focused on independent living skills. Yeah. And so there are one resource that is on the Down Syndrome Partnership website that as far as therapy groups are concerned, Cutting Edge is a therapy group that specifically has shared with me that they're focusing on independent living skills and young adult skills, but there might be other groups listed that would be doing the same thing. So I'm not sure, Lisa, where your loved one is participating in OT, but I would love to know as well if they're focusing on independent living skills because it is kind of an emerging area of practice in occupational therapy as far as oh, monkey mouths, awesome. Yeah, I've heard great things about them as well. And so being able to find OTs who are dedicated to this because we know that it is in our scope of practice. And sometimes it's just that OTs love littles and that's what they want to do. They got into pediatric therapy to support young children and maybe it's an interest thing. So that's hard, but there's lots of OTs out there who do want to support young adulthood as well. And to speak to the cutting edge point, and then I'll get to the other two questions. Cutting edge is just a private practice that I've connected with. I'm the academic fieldwork coordinator at TCU, and so one of my jobs is to find and connect with the sites in the area where our students can eventually go out on fieldwork placements as part of their graduate placement. So I'm getting familiar with the resources here. Cutting Edge is just one that we've connected with. I believe they have a location, it's in Mansfield, and then another location closer to Dallas. But they definitely highlight their independent living skills and young adulthood services. So I'll put their website in the chat. But I do know that they have like a coffee shop within their facility where they're working on job skills, and they have a lot of just like real functional opportunities. So something that I love about OT is that you can sometimes get occupational therapy services in home or in natural settings, and I think that's where our loved ones learn best. And so within Cutting Edge, they have in their building, they have an apartment style room with all the sort of the needs that you would need for cooking or bed, like house management, making a bed. They've got the vacuum. They've got this coffee shop for job skills. So really great facility and seems like they have a good setup for promoting these skills in a really functional way. Um, Julie said, have you seen success in learning faster decision making? What specifically would you recommend for decreasing the amount of time it takes for a person to make decisions? I think it just depends on the individual and their skills for sure. But I do love using visuals and like flow charts as a way for to make decision making. So that could be one strategy you could use. I would say starting with a specific decision that might be having to be made day to day, like where to go to lunch. And maybe it's a decision tree, like flow chart of the things you have to consider when you're making that decision to kind of like have a step-by-step process of decision making. And then generalizing that over time, and pulling the supports away. But there's definitely skills and strategies for decision making to promote um, success in that. I hope that answers your question. Paul asked, can this recording be shared out? Sorry if you already announced that. And I think Whitney, if this,
Yeah, so this is recorded and we put all of our recordings on our website. So if you wanted to go look under the speak tab on our website, it lists all past recordings. But I'll also send you guys an email with the YouTube link because we would love for you guys to share about Speak. That's something we're learning is that a lot of people don't know that we're doing this. And so any help sharing it with others would be greatly appreciated.
yes. And Julie asked about consults and out-of-pocket costs. And so I'm not currently providing OT services within Fort Worth. We're just starting this education program. So, but I previously worked in a private practice in St. Louis where we provided consult opportunity. And so I know that it is an option, though it might not always be covered by insurance. So I imagine that if you contacted some of these different therapy practices and asked about consult options, they could give you a better idea. But most often, therapy services have to have an out-of-pocket cost that is similar to like the reimbursement. And if they take certain insurances, then it mandates that their out-of-pocket cost is a certain amount. So I can't say that it's inexpensive, but a lot of the times you could get a 15-minute or 30-minute consult phone call. And if you're paying out of pocket, um, then it could be like, or there could be virtual options as well. So, just like looking into that opportunity, whether that's phone call consult or virtual consult, but it could be like $120 for an hour. So it could be $60 for 30 minutes. And that's not inexpensive, but insurance does sometimes cover consult as well. So it's worth just asking about consult options when you're looking into therapy options. Um, any strategies for time management, getting ready for school or bed? Yes. I I love like support strategies from a time management perspective of incorporating technology. There's definitely different apps out there, whether that's your alarm clock, or maybe a visual schedule is something that we really promote in occupational therapy. And this can be done on your phone, or you can have a physical copy that you print out. But I love a visual schedule that's tangible, that has your list of things to do, and maybe you complement that with an alarm or timer on your phone. And so say you're getting ready for school routine, you have from 7 to 8 in the morning, and your 7 o'clock alarm is what wakes you up. And by 7:10, you want to have your teeth brushed. And by 7:10, you want to have you eat your breakfast. 7:20, you want to have your teeth brushed. 7:30, you want to be changed. So maybe you have a visual schedule with the time on one side and an image of representing that routine on the other, and you set your alarm to hit all those times. And so having that visual with you during the routine to get in the groove and use those timer. And this is just one general strategy. Again, we want to personalize this to the individual and problem solve with the individual and with their families because I could be saying this and you're like, yeah, but the timer isn't what motivates my daughter or my son to get out of bed. The timer can go, or the alarm can go 10 times. Well, then we need to think about what is a good internal motivator, a good reward. You can do what like reward yourself for something you do. Like if you do one task, then I'm gonna get to do this. And like there's different things, different strategies, but we always want to look at what the strengths of the individual are, what has worked in the past, what's not working at all. So I apologize if it's not specific enough to um, support your specific needs for your loved one. And I want to say too that I'm happy to be a resource. My information is on the board page of the website, and I believe my email's there. If not, Whitney has it, and I'm happy to consult on just being able to direct you towards a resource or towards an assessment that would be beneficial based on kind of what you're looking for. So I want to be a resource to you all, especially as I learn. Um, about the resources that exist in DFW. OCD tendencies. I am not, I have to say I'm not um, a specialist in OCD, but there are definitely resources out there, and there's occupational therapists who have a little bit more expertise in that than I do. Um, Maybe if you could expand on a tendency, I could support a specific strategy on that. Um, Writing perseveration. And so with writing perseveration, like is it in certain settings? It's just wanting to be writing. Is it about something specific? That's kind of those are the questions we probably would want to know. And so thinking for OT, we're always thinking about person factors, environmental factors, and okay, lists at home. Okay. So and OCD is very specific. So I don't want to pretend that I'm an expert for OCD because I find that sometimes strategies for OCD are very different than, yeah, over focus on a fold in a sheet of paper. Um, Certain strategies for OCD are kind of like oppose other strategies. So I actually don't want to speak wrong about the strategies that could support that because I am not an expert on OCD. But I will say that any occupational therapist for anything going on and it can support an individual with perseverations or compulsions. We want to look at the person, the environment, and the occupation or meaningful activity. So we're going to look at what strengths and areas for growth an individual has. We're going to look at their interests. We're going to look at the environment, and we're going to look at the activity from whether that's folding a sheet of paper or writing perseveration, because ultimately we want to address anything that's going to be impacting participation in meaningful activity. So if OCD or over focusing on folding in a sheet of paper, a fold in a sheet of paper, or over focusing on wanting to write lists at home is taking away from the individual's capacity to participate in their day-to-day life and meaningful activities, then it's something we want to address. But I'd have to look more into the research on OCD specific. I apologize. Thank you.
Yeah, our time is coming to an end. Thank you so much, Grace, for all the amazing information. And like I said, this will be recorded and I'll share it out in an email. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to me and I can connect you with Grace. And I really appreciate everyone being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks.